Hello everyone. Today we are going to look at the game between Fabiano Caruana with the white pieces and the Russian Grandmaster Evgeny Tomashevsky with the black pieces. This game is from the FIDE Grand Prix in Paris from March 10th, 2013. And I decided to show this game today because of a previous game that I analyzed from the Olympiad that just passed a few days ago between Fabiano Caruana with the white pieces against another Russian GM, uh, Evgeny Bareyev, where Caruana absolutely crushed him in a short variation of the Caro Kann. And after seeing that game and how fluid Caruana played the white pieces, I just had a hunch that he had played that variation before because it seemed like he just absolutely knew um, that line in and out. So I'm going to show you a game from a few years back against another top Russian GM, Evgeny Tomashevsky, who was rated 2703 at the time, and Caruana was rated 2779. So the game started off e4, c6, there's your Caro Kann, d4, d5, e5, known as the advanced variation of the Caro Kann. Bishop f5, c5 is also possible. We're working on bishop f5, knight f3, as opposed to the last game I analyzed with GM John Nunn versus Maxim Delugi, where GM Nunn played the move knight c3. So knight f3 was played, e6, bishop e2, and this is known as the short variation, and takes his namesake after Nigel Short, who had some success here. Knight d7, castles, bishop g6, and this is a relatively standard position. The bishop moves back to g6 in order to vacate the f5 square for this knight. This knight will either go to e7 and f5 as in the French, or knight h6 to f5 as in the French. Since we're on the topic of the French defense, what I would like to mention is that a lot of people say, well, this is like a better version of the French advanced variation because black gets his bishop out of the pawn chain. Usually in the French defense, bishop is locked inside this pawn chain for a while, but instead of this pawn being on c6, it would be on c5. This knight would often be on c6 already, putting more pressure on d4 and queen b6. So in exchange, this bishop is often locked in as other moves in the position are made. In the Caro Kann, black gets his bishop out very early outside the pawn chain, and it's not is that simple. That explanation is too basic. That okay, this is a better version of the French, therefore it must be good because the bishop escapes the pawn chain. And it's this type of logic that led to many defeats for black from the because this white's position looks very modest and normal. I mean, he just basically knight f3, bishop e2, castle. It doesn't look like white is really trying to attack or anything like that. And black has his bishop outside of the pawn chain, and it seems like it will be easy for him to achieve the c5 advance and basically do all the things he would like to do in the French, but with the bishop out. However, let's talk about the downside of this bishop coming out so early. One of the main downsides of the bishop coming out this early is that black has tipped his hat to a strategy. And what often winds up happening when black has a bad game in this line is that this bishop often doesn't become a major player or factor in the game. White simply either trades his bishop off ingloriously, or the bishop just ends up blocked by its own pieces and not really being useful. Furthermore, what happens is since this bishop is on the king side, white attacks the queen side where the bishop normally would be on c8, providing some extra defensive force in that sector. So white is saying, okay, you want to bring your queen side bishop to the king side? Well, we're going over on the queen side to exploit its absence. So there are pros and cons to that bishop coming out early to f5 and g6. If black can make it work, of course, and make that bishop a factor in the game, then it's fantastic. But if not, then it looks dubious. And the same ideas occur in the Slav defense, where the bishop comes out to f5 early, and sometimes white will just play moves like knight h4 and wind up trading the bishop off early, or sometimes the bishop ends up on h6, excuse me, not h6, h7, and is totally blocked out of the game. So that's another way to look at it. Just don't think just because it's out the pawn chain it's good. The pieces, in order to be good, have to be active and actually performing some type of duty. Just being developed somewhere on the board and not participating in the game is not, not the right idea. So let's go on. So after bishop g6, knight bd2. And the idea of this move, of course, continuing development, but this knight wants to go to b3. And this knight on b3 does several things. It supports the d4 square, and also it's keeping an eye on the dark squares over here, and it's also in this position that c4 advance, supporting a c4 advance. But the main idea is to go to knight b3 and then launch and then support the advance of the pawns and the attack in general on black's queen side. Let's keep looking. So knight h6, that knight is going to f5 as I said earlier. Knight b3, and just note bishop h6 is possible here, but it's a double-edged move. Sometimes black is able to use the open G file to his advantage. So knight f5, and I want you during this game to just check on this bishop every now and then, and and tell me how effective it is during the game. a4. Caruana plays the same idea, same move he played against Bareev in the Olympiad. If you haven't seen that game, check out my analysis on that game, Caruana versus Bareev. So a4. Why a4? White wants to induce some weakening on black's queen side. By playing a5, he's hoping to get black to play a6, weakening the dark square b6. Now, if you look at black's position again, which is very solid, most of his pawns are on light squares. Matter of fact, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 out of 8 pawns on light squares. With that said, this is why it's strategically feasible for black, and you'll see, for white rather, and you'll see this in several openings like the French. It's strategically feasible for white to trade off this dark square bishop for this dark square bishop. Reason being, is 1. We see the pawn chain on dark squares, so white's bishop is not as effective. And the other reason is once these dark square bishops are gone, you'll see black is left with so much more weakness on the dark squares, and white will love to exploit that. And that's one of white's major strategies, is to trade off the dark square bishop when he gets the opportunity, so that he may exploit the dark squares. Now structurally, black is okay. So white's advantage right now just consists of space. And he must be very careful in maintaining that advantage, because any slip, black will happily play the move c5 and try to liberate his position. So black is looking for the right time to liberate his position. Meanwhile, white is trying to continue to build up his authority in the position, and he doesn't want black rather to have any moves where he can break out and free his position up. Okay, so moving on. After a4, Tomashevsky played rook c8. Again, everything's working towards c5 being played. a5 played by Caruana, again with the idea of provoking weakness on the queen side. And remember what I told you about this bishop. See how the bishop's over here not doing anything? So now white is exploiting the lack of a defender over there. h5. He wants to solidify the knight, perhaps from moves like g4, which are common in the position, kicking the knight off. Also, sometimes this pawn will come all the way down here, and sometimes this rook will become active on that file. Caruana plays g3. There's the bishop to e7. And if a move like, for instance, say a move like h4, then g4 happens, kicking the knight off, and that's the idea, one of the main ideas behind the move g3. In other words, this becomes ineffective. Okay, so g3 was played, bishop e7, bishop f4. Caruana is just completing his development. There's a6. So now we see there's a little bit of weakness here creeping up now on the b5, on the b6 square. Now that that has occurred, Caruana strikes with the move c4, and d takes c4 was played. Now if you look at the Caruana-Bareev game, Bareev never played d takes c4, and he tried to keep the position, he tried to keep his triangle structure, this pawn on c6, d5, and e6, and wind up getting squashed, with white spatial advantage. But here Tomashevsky decided to play d takes c4, opening up the position somewhat, which gives white a slight advantage. So, for example, say you just try to keep it closed, castle. White has some dangerous ideas, for instance c5, which seems like it does nothing now, but in the long run, black will basically run out of moves. And right here, for instance, white will play bishop g5, getting rid of the dark square bishops. Then put his knight on g5, and then perhaps follow up with moves like h4, maybe king g2, and f3 and g4, kicking the knight out and just slowly improving his position. Perhaps even playing knight c1, a2, knight to c3, a4, and then b6. And it's this slow type of maneuvering that eventually will crack the black's position. Another idea, instead of c5 there, just simply queen d2. And say, for instance, he tries to keep, he doesn't want to break out with c5 or anything. King h8, rook ac1, and I say king h7. Again, the idea bishop g5. Or even just c takes d5, c takes d5, rook c8, queen takes c8, and rook c1, attacking the queen on the c file. And then say after queen, let's say queen b8, with the idea of bringing this rook in to trade, queen c3, taking over the c file, which is very dangerous. And of course we could see white would love to penetrate up to c7. And I'm not saying that black is completely lost here, but it's these small advantages that just build up and build up and build up. Yes, it'll be a long game, but it's white who's in the driver's seat here. So this explains why Tomashevsky and some players play, it's their preference. They rather play in this type of position than try to open up the position. So Tomashevsky decided, hey, I need some counterplay. So he played d takes c4. Now bishop takes c4. Now we see white's pieces are effectively placed. He has a space advantage. So black has to be careful. Now for black, he has a target on it with the d4 pawn. But white has that adequately protected with knight on b3 and knight on f3 and the queen on d1. Also, black is prepared to play c5, but now timing is an issue because now he has to worry that if he plays c5 at the wrong time, then the move d5 will be very detrimental to his position. So Tomaszewski castled after bishop c4, queen e2, getting the queen off the d file, connecting the rooks. And here, Tomaszewski, perhaps getting a little bit anxious, try to break out with the move b5. And after a takes b6 en passant, knight takes b6. Well, notice that the a pawn is attacked about 4 times, and he just loses the a pawn. And obviously he felt that was a move that he had to do, and so here he was down a pawn. But now I want to just go back before b5 and let's look at some alternatives. So again, if he tries c5 here, right, trying to break out, look at the bishop on c4 and look at the pawn on e6. Boom, d5. E takes d5, bishop takes d5. Fantastic position for white. e6 is on the cards. Also, this pawn is threatened on b7, and black is already in hot water here. So c5 was not an option. Let's look at queen c7, which is probably a little better. Rook ac1, right, lining up the rook with the queen. Rook fd8, bishop g5. There's that motif again, getting rid of the dark squared bishop. And once this dark squared bishop is removed, these squares become more vulnerable, more accessible to the knights. Right? Not only c5, of course, this knight is here right now, but it might not be there later on. And then look at the d6 square. Again, think, in the future. Don't look at the position right now, but look in the future. That's why it's strategically beneficial to white to exchange these bishops. For instance, this knight later on might go to d2, e4, and end up here. And you might even have a knight on c4 and e6. So, for instance, after bishop takes g5, knight takes g5, Say c5. Again, I'm giving you an example of a natural looking move where that black would like to play and try to break out. And it looks good because after c5, you figure, hey, if he takes, then you can attack on the attack the e pawn, right? However, there's tactical issues here. And what happens here is bishop takes e6, f takes e6, knight takes e6. So there's two pawns. You see the fork here, and after queen c6, then the knight just simply captures. So for instance, knight takes d8, rook takes d8, and a move like e6. And this is rough. So those are just two alternatives to what was actually played. But we could see that Tomashevsky, experienced grandmaster, even felt the pressure in this position, because when your position is cramped, it becomes difficult to find moves at a certain point. And so he probably decided to sacrifice this pawn. I'm not going to say he overlooked it. It's too easy to see. But he probably felt that he needs some activity in the position before he's just squeezed to death here. So he played b5. A takes b6. Knight takes b6. Bishop takes a6, attacking the rook. Rook c7. Rook fd1, good move. Right, just again lining up the rook with the queen. Rook fc1 is also possible. And I like this move better because you just get on this target right here right away. But there's nothing wrong with rook fd1. So rook a7. Again, this pawn is unprotected. He could even move his rook here again if he wanted to. Okay, now he plays h4. Knight d5, and that's one of the reasons also why black often plays d takes c4 in this variation, so that he can have access to this square with the knight. And we see the bishop being challenged, and the bishop goes to d2. Now, after all I've been saying, you would think the bishop will come here, and I stand by this move. That's the correct move right there. Let's trade off the bishops. He played bishop d2. Queen b6. There's an attack on the knight, in case you didn't notice that, and there's also an attack on this pawn. Plays bishop c4, and Caruana is in consolidation mode now. He realizes, hey, I'm up a pawn. I'm gonna liquidate as much as possible and win this ending. So that's what's going on here. So you're not seeing the best moves by Caruana, but good moves. So rook f8, doubling up. Bishop c3. Again, this is like not the best move, but consolidation type moves, just protecting all of his assets in the position so that he doesn't just somehow drop a pawn. Because what is threatened with rook f8 is to exchange on a1 twice, get rid of the rooks, and then the knight ends up on a1. Then he can take that pawn on d4. So let me show you real quick. So instead of bishop c3, let's just do like dubious move like king g2. So what would happen was rook takes, and say rook takes. You see, now the knight is drawn away from the defense of this pawn. So knight d4 would have happened, and then of course black magically would be better here. So of course a strong GM like Caruana is not having it, so he just plays bishop c3. So now if the rooks take, he has another piece defending that pawn. So rook takes, and that's what happens. No problem here. Tomashevsky's idea is to play c5. Now here, there is no d5 happening. So he feels, hey, I can play c5 safely. And it's great because he can play c5 safely. The problem still remains is he's down a pawn. And Tomaszewski got what he wanted, I believe, which was activity. The position opened up and he was able to get some activity. Problem is a pawn is a pawn is a pawn. So he has to somehow have some compensation for that pawn. It just doesn't look like he has enough for it. Caruana simply brings the knight back into play and putting pressure on the c5 pawn. So c takes d4, knight f d4. Tomaszewski grabs the bishop pair from white. Knight takes c3, b takes c3, and now bishop c5. And that move, I don't really understand it because white is simply just gonna snatch the bishop off. Looking at this, I mean, just real quick, I would think of move. I would try to, if it being a pawn down, first of all, I'll try to keep the pieces on the board. And here, for instance, I know I have this little pawn on h5. Maybe I would try knight h6 or something, and with the idea of coming here, perhaps just something a little different, because this bishop, remember I told you about this bishop, that bishop has been out of the game since it moved to g6. And that's what I was telling you about earlier, is that okay, the bishop is out the pawn chain, but so what? Like, it has done absolutely nothing. That bishop would love to be here right now, right? If it stayed on the queen side, right, it might have been out of the game for a while, but when things open up, it might have been here or on this diagonal, right, where it's useful. Instead, it's over here, unemployed. Let's go. Bishop takes b takes c3. Excuse me. So bishop c5, which I don't get that move. Knight takes c5. Like, who wouldn't do that? Queen takes c5. And this must be a move that Tomaszewski overlooked. And if you want, you can pause the video and try to figure out what Caruana did here. This is a great insight to his style, because he's not really like a super, known, like, he's not like a Tao type player, a super tactical player like a Kasparov or something like that. But of course, all GMs are very strong in tactics. They have to be. But it's like he uses the tactics to just achieve these positional ends, and it's fantastic. So here we see Tomaszewski, the queen on c5, knight on f5. It looks like he's just threatening to win a pawn here. Right, knight takes d4, c takes d4, queen takes d4, and draw, shake hands. If he moves this bishop, there's pressure on the c3 pawn. So it looks all right. However, Caruana played knight takes e6, and this is all about playing against a bad bishop on g6. The whole strategy of this move right here, and a lot of the strategy of the game has been exploiting this bishop's absence from the queen side, and now at the end, just exploiting his basic virtual absence from the game. So knight takes e6, f takes e6, bishop takes e6, check. So that's two pawns gone, and of course bishop f7 can't be played because the knight on f5 is hanging. So the queen must take a step. So the queen goes to h8. The Queen goes to f8, and queen e4, double attacking this piece. And then, of course, if the knight tries to move, then queen takes g6. So king h8, bishop takes f5, bishop takes f5, queen takes h5. There's another pawn. Check. So 3 pawns for the piece. And now look at look at the position. Black has his bishop that he cherished so much, but he's down 4 pawns. 4 pawns for the bishop. That's pretty good. And it's check. Note here too. Bishop h7, queen e8 check, bishop g8. So, and white has a draw to boot if he wanted to. He could just keep checking. He could go to h5 check, bishop h7. At this point, Tomashevsky would love that. But Caruana didn't play knight takes 29, knight takes e6 just for a draw. He played for the win. e6. Passed pawns must be pushed. Now notice the bishop is pinned, so there's not even a sacrifice or anything that can be made. Even though you'll still be lost after that. So king h7, freeing up the bishop, hoping to, maybe play queen e5, attacking the e6 pawn and the c3 pawn. e7, and now deadly check is threatened. Threat, real simple. White could play queen takes g8 check, king g8, and queen on e8. That's one move. Or he could just simply play after queen e5, right, which deals with that threat. Queen g8 no longer works, right? Queen takes g8, king takes g8. Okay, let me just show it to you. Like I said, I always have to keep the new viewers in mind. People like that don't really know how to play, or are just learning. So let me show you. So queen takes g8, king takes g8, and that doesn't work. And that's what the move queen e5 is designed to stop. So after e7, queen e5 was played. So now what do? We want to get this queen, but we want to get this pawn promoted. So what do we do to get him promoted? Well, Grandmaster Caruana played queen f8, and there's no stopping this move. And that shows you the ineffectiveness of this bishop right here. And I hope you enjoyed that game. That's all for today. Please like and subscribe. I hope you learned something about this variation. And if anything, just learn that just putting your piece, getting your bishop outside the pawn chain is not the end of the matter. That does not make it a good piece. As we seen from this game, that bishop came to f5, then went on g6 and did absolutely nothing the entire game. It was just ineffective, and Caruana played a great piece of strategy against it. Alright, so please like, subscribe, comment, all that good stuff. Tell your friends, share the videos, whatever, it's all good. And I'll see you guys on the next one. If you guys have any openings particularly you like, I'll pull out some games, and we'll do this together and have some fun. Alright, see you later.